Okay, let's unpack this. We're diving deep today into a historical figure whose life generated an absolutely incredible number of stories, myths, legends. Napoleon Bonaparte.
Yeah, it seems like almost everything connected to him just exploded into these wild tales, some bizarre, some just unbelievable.
Exactly. And for this deep dive, we've got a great collection of sources, accounts from people actually there, memoirs, solid historical analysis, stuff digging right into these famous stories.
Right. So our mission basically is to sift through all that, pull out the most fascinating bits, and try to figure out what's actually true, what's maybe exaggerated, and what's just pure legend.
It's about giving you a way to cut through all the noise, really, get a clearer picture.
We're talking about everything from like weird hunting trips gone wrong to battlefield decisions that sound questionable, romance
Missing
novel.
body parts, I saw that mentioned, and even conspiracy theories about how he died. Quite the range.
It really is. So, I mean, where do you even start? Figuring out the truth about Napoleon, the sources basically say it's become practically an art form.
Why is that, though? What is it about him specifically that attracted so much, well, myth-making?
Well, a big part of it, according to these accounts, seems to be his personality. Incredibly strong-willed, charismatic.
Right, he wasn't exactly a wallflower.
Not at all. He inspired fierce loyalty, but also, really intense opposition. So you had tons of people with reasons, political or personal, to either build him up or tear him down.
Ah, okay, so perfect conditions for stories, true or not, to just take root and spread like wildfire.
Exactly. He was larger than life, and the stories about him just followed suit.
That makes a lot of sense. I figure that polarizing is bound to get conflicting narratives.
Oh.
Well, speaking of surprising stories popping up, there's one in General Thibault's memoirs.
Hmm.
It's about the celebrations after Napoleon's big win with the treaties of Tilsit in 1807. That was huge, right? Gave him control of Central Europe.
Oh, absolutely. A real peak of his power. And his chief of staff, Berthier, newly minted Prince of Neuchâtel, he wanted to throw this spectacular rabbit hunt for Napoleon at his place, Chateau de Gravois.
Right, a celebratory hunt. Sounds normal enough until you get to the rabbits. Cartier's plan was, let's say, ambitious.
Ambitious is one word for it. He apparently told his guy to gather not just a few rabbits, but like a horde. The sources say somewhere between 1,000 and 3,000 rabbits.
1 to 3,000 for one hunt. That's absurd.
It's staggering, isn't it? So the sources describe the setup, all these rabbits crammed into cages, lined up at the edge of this big field on the estate, all ready to be let loose for the big event.
But here's the really funny thing about how Thibault tells it, or rather, doesn't tell it. He builds up this incredible scene, the sheer ridiculous number of rabbits, calls it a phenomenal story,
Yeah.
and then the account just stops.
Up.
The sources point out he details the whole crazy setups, but doesn't actually tell us what happened when they opened the cages on thousands of rabbits.
What? Huh. It just leaves you hanging. You picture the chaos, the potential disaster, but no punchline.
Exactly. A glimpse into the lengths people went to impress him, maybe, but yeah, utterly anticlimactic storytelling.
Okay, switching gears a bit. There's another story type that crops up about his private life, his creative side even. The idea that Napoleon wrote romance novels.
Right, the great general penning love stories. Is there anything to that?
Well, there's a kernel of truth, like with many of these stories, but it gets exaggerated. He did write a piece of fiction back in 1795,
Okay.
but it definitely wasn't a novel. It was really short, only 9 pages, called Clisson et Eugénie.
9 pages.
Right.
Not exactly a sweeping epic. What was it about then?
Historians who've looked at it mostly agree it reflected his own relationship at the time with Eugénie Desiree Clary, a relationship that was actually fizzling out right when he wrote it.
Ah, so more like a personal reflection, almost therapeutic.
Possibly. It wasn't published in his lifetime, but luckily some friends and family held on to copies, so it got pieced together and published much later.
Interesting. It shows a different facet, doesn't it?
It does. And the sources mention other hints of him writing. He apparently claimed he was working on a poem about Corsica, his homeland, though that seems to have vanished.
Okay.
And even earlier, when he was just 17, he wrote a history of Corsica. Someone encouraged him to publish it, but then, military duty called.
So it wasn't just a one-off, this writing thing.
No, seems like a genuine interest. Also, at 17, he wrote an essay for a competition the Academy of Lions was running. The topic was pretty deep.
What was it?
Something like, what are the principles and institutions by which mankind can be raised to the highest pitch of happiness?
Wow, that's heavy for a 17-year-old. Did he win?
Huh? No. But there's a great little story about it. Years later, when he was, Napoleon, he apparently found a copy of his teenage essay in the Academy's archives.
Yeah.
He read a few pages and was apparently so unimpressed with his younger self's work that he just tossed it straight into the fire.
No way. That's brutal self-criticism.
Tells you something about him, doesn't it? Okay, let's jump to a story that feels almost like mythical. From the Egypt campaign crossing the Red Sea.
Oh, yeah, I read about this. This was around 1798.
That's right, near Syria. Napoleon and some cavalry officers decided to visit the Wells of Moses on the other side of the Red Sea. They timed it for the ebb tide, when the water was super low.
So they could actually ride across the seabed.
Exactly, which they did. But the return trip, that got dicey. It was dark by then, and the tide started coming in fast. The path they'd taken was disappearing under the water.
Oh, wow. Lost in the dark on a flooding seabed. How did they get out of that?
Well, this is where his quick thinking comes in. He realized they couldn't see the way, so he ordered his men to form a big circle around him, facing out, like spokes on a wheel.
Okay, why?
Each man was told to ride straight out until his horse started to swim, then turn back immediately and follow the rider next to him who was still on solid ground.
Ah, clever. Using the horses hitting deep water to map out the edge of the shallows.
Precisely. They basically felt their way back, following whoever was still walking. They all made it back to shore, soaking wet, but safe.
That's incredible. Terrifying, but what a cool head under pressure.
And Napoleon himself, the sources say he had this amazing comment afterwards. He apparently said the situation would have furnished all the preachers of Christendom with a magnificent text against me.
Huh? He knew exactly how it looked like the Pharaoh getting swallowed by the sea chasing Moses.
He absolutely saw the parallel. Brilliant line. Okay, staying in Egypt, the Sphinx's nose. This one is everywhere. The story that Napoleon's troops used it for cannon practice between 1798 and 1801, true or false?
Yeah, I've definitely heard that one. Did they do it?
Nope, definitely false. And we have solid proof, thankfully, for Napoleon's reputation on this one. There's an illustration by a Danish guy, Frederick Louis Norden.
Okay.
He published detailed drawings of the Sphinx way back in 1755.
1955, Napoleon wasn't even born yet.
Exactly. And Norden's drawing clearly shows the nose is already gone by then, so case closed. His army couldn't have done it.
Wow, so where did that story even come from?
Seems like it only really started circulating much, much later. Around the beginning of the 20th century, maybe?
Huh. So if his soldiers didn't blast it off, did the sources say who did?
Yeah, there are a couple of other theories mentioned. The one most Egyptologists seem to favor is that a fanatical Muslim leader deliberately damaged it way back in 1380, saw it as an idol.
1380. Okay, definitely not Napoleon.
Right. Another idea floated is that Mamluk warriors used it for target practice. But again, that would have been centuries before Napoleon got there.
It's crazy how he gets blamed for stuff that happened hundreds of years earlier.
Yeah.
Okay, shifting from visual damage to something much darker, the accusation that he poisoned his own 6 soldiers in Jaffa?
Yeah, this is a grim one. The sources lay out the situation. May 1799, during the retreat from Jaffa, they were moving out the sick and wounded, but there was this small group left.
How small?
Accounts vary, maybe 7 men, maybe up to 30. They had the bubonic plague, really bad. Couldn't be moved safely with the others.
And leaving them meant capture by the Turks.
Exactly. Capture, and probably torture, and a horrible death. Napoleon visited them, saw how bad it was. He felt leaving them to the enemy was actually the crueler option.
So what did he suggest?
He proposed to the head doctor, Dejeunesse. He basically asked if it wouldn't be more humane to give these few guys, who were clearly dying anyway, a large dose of opium, end their suffering quickly.
A mercy killing, essentially. That's how he framed it.
That's the interpretation in some accounts, yes. But Dejeunesse, the doctor, flat out refused, said it wasn't his job.
So it didn't actually happen. They weren't poisoned on his orders.
Not by the doctor, no. Napoleon ended up leaving a small rear guard. And apparently some of those sick men were later found and rescued by the British, actually.
That's probably good, yes. It blew up, right?
Oh, massively. It became a huge PR disaster for him. This, difficult ethical question raised about a handful of men morphed into this widespread belief that Napoleon had ordered the poisoning of several hundred soldiers.
Now, how did it spread so effectively?
Well, captured French soldiers and officers apparently believed the exaggerated version themselves and told their British captors. And the British public, already hostile, just ate it up. It became accepted fact over there.
Based on a suggestion that was refused, twisted into mass murder.
Pretty much. And Napoleon knew how damaging it was. To fight back, he actually commissioned a huge painting in 1804 by Antoine Jean Gros.
Oh, yeah? What did it show?
It depicted him visiting the plague hospital in Jaffa, looking all brave and compassionate, even touching one of the sick soldiers, directly countering the poison story.
That painting's really famous, isn't it? Bonaparte visiting the plague-stricken at Jaffa.
That's the one. It became a major piece of Napoleonic art, influenced neoclassicism. It's a prime example of him using art as propaganda to manage his image.
Fascinating strategy. Okay, sticking with Egypt for a second. Was another really out there story. Cleopatra's mummy being chucked in a Paris sewer in the 1940s?
Huh. Yes, the sources mention this one as peak historical myth-making. The story goes, some museum workers were clearing out storage, found this mummy case, assumed it was junk,
Oh, no.
and supposedly dumped the contents down a drain, only later, oops, that might have been Cleopatra, brought back by Napoleon's team?
That has to be the worst museum inventory management ever. Is any of it true?
Not a chance. The simplest reason, as the sources point out, is that Cleopatra's tomb has never actually been found. No one knows where she was buried.
Right. Can't lose a mummy you never had.
Exactly. So definitely myth, but it does tap into that general idea you mentioned earlier, doesn't it? That Napoleon just went to Egypt to loot the place.
Yeah, it fits that narrative perfectly.
But the reality presented in the sources is, again, more complicated. Yes, it was a military campaign, but he also brought this huge team, 150 savants, scientists, engineers, scholars.
Right, you mentioned them. What were they doing?
Their specific job was to study and meticulously record everything about ancient Egypt, the monuments, the artifacts, the history, the natural world, while the army was fighting.
So a massive scientific expedition running parallel to the invasion.
Precisely. And while the military side eventually failed, the scientific side was a huge success. Their work led to this massive, multi-volume publication, the Description de l'Égypte. Took decades to finish.
And that's what kicked off Egyptomania.
Directly. It basically unveiled ancient Egypt to Europe in incredible detail and sparked this massive fascination. Obelisks in Paris, sphinxes everywhere.
Got it. But the sources mention an irony here.
Yeah, the interesting twist is that while Napoleon's expedition itself didn't lead to widespread French looting, his scholarly work kind of opened the door by showing Europe what treasures were there.
It encouraged other countries to come later and help themselves.
Seems like it. An unintended consequence of his focus on scholarship, perhaps.
Huh. Okay, let's pivot to a different kind of story, battlefield premonitions. General Stengel and the Battle of Marengo in 1800.
Ah, yeah, the dream story. This one's very dramatic. The tale goes that Stengel had this dream where he saw himself killed at Marengo by some huge Croatian soldier.
Okay.
So, convinced it was destiny, he supposedly gives Napoleon his will, asks him to handle his affairs, and then, boom, next day in battle, killed exactly as predicted by a big Croatian.
And didn't the story also claim Napoleon mentioned him on his deathbed?
Yeah, that's part of the legend that Stengel's name was among Napoleon's last words years later. It's a powerful narrative.
But how much of it actually checks out according to the sources?
Almost none of it, unfortunately, for the storytellers. The sources really pick this one apart. First big problem. General Stengel was killed in action, yes, but not at Marengo in 1800.
No.
He died at the Battle of Mondovi, which happened 4 years earlier, in 1796.
Oh, wrong battle, wrong year by quite a margin. That kind of sinks the whole premonition thing for Marengo.
Pretty much. Second issue, Napoleon's last words. While historians debate exactly what he said, the idea he was calling out, Spengel, hurry, attack, isn't taken seriously by academics.
But didn't he mention Stengel at all near the end?
He did, but it wasn't like that. A few days before he died, when he was really sick and feverish, he was apparently delirious and calling out orders to various dead generals, including Stengel, as if fighting an imaginary battle.
Ah, so fever dream,
Yeah.
not coherent last words. Very different.
Very different. And maybe the final nail in the coffin for this story. When did this detailed version, the dream, the will, the Croatian, first appear in writing?
When?
Not until 1890.
1890. That's nearly 100 years after Marengo.
Exactly. Strongly suggests the whole dramatic narrative was cooked up long, long after everyone involved was dead.
Wow. It shows how easily these elaborate tales can just materialize later on.
Okay.
Let's move into a family intrigue. Always
Yeah.
messy.
Yeah.
The rumor about Napoleon fathering his stepdaughter Hortense's child.
Ah, yes. Napoleon's family dynamics were legendary for their complexity and backstabbing. So Napoleon marries Josephine, become stepfather to her kids, Eugene and Hortense. Seems he genuinely cared for Hortense. But Josephine couldn't give Napoleon an heir, which made her position precarious, especially with Napoleon's brothers constantly sniping at her. So she pushed really hard for Hortense to marry Napoleon's brother, Louis.
Why Louis?
The idea was if Hortense and Louis had a child, it would have Bonaparte blood. Napoleon might favor that child as an heir, which would shore up Josephine's own position.
Okay, dynastic maneuvering. Did they want to marry?
Reports suggest neither Hortense nor Louis was particularly keen, but Josephine got Napoleon to approve it in 1802, and it happened. Then, after they were married and Hortense got pregnant, this rumor starts.
Rumor being?
That the baby wasn't Louis's but Napoleon's, and that Josephine had arranged the marriage specifically to cover up the affair and pass off Napoleon's child as his brother's legitimate heir.
Whoa. That's incredibly scandalous. Where did such a damaging rumor come from?
According to the sources, it seems it was actually started and spread by Napoleon's own siblings and in-laws.
His own family. Why would they do that?
Jealousy and power plays. They didn't want Louis's children or a potential secret child of Napoleon's getting any special treatment or moving closer to the line of succession. They wanted to protect their own influence.
So they weaponized gossip against Josephine and Hortense.
Looks like it. And of course, the British press, always hungry for anti-Napoleon propaganda, grabbed onto this rumor with glee and made sure it got maximum circulation.
Vicious stuff. Family drama mixed with international politics.
Oh.
Okay, how about something purely in the realm of conspiracy theory? The idea that the guy exiled to St. Helena wasn't actually Napoleon.
Yes, the look-alike theory. This specific version was pushed by someone named M. Omersa in 1911. He claimed a double. A guy named Francois-Eugene Ribaut, who supposedly looked just like Napoleon, was swapped in and sent to St. Helena in 1815.
Okay, so if Ribaut went to the island, what did Omersa claim happened to the real Napoleon?
The story gets pretty wild here. Apparently, the real Napoleon escaped, grew a beard for disguise, moved to Verona, Italy.
And did what? Lived quietly?
And opened a shop selling eyeglasses.
Selling glasses? Seriously?
That's the story. And the ending is just as dramatic. This real Napoleon was supposedly shot and killed in 1823 trying to sneak into the imperial palace in Verona where his son was king. Got caught by a guard, wouldn't say who he was, bang.
That sounds like a bad movie plot. What do the sources say about its plausibility?
They basically shoot it down. First, a swap like that would need a huge conspiracy involving Napoleon's inner circle, guards, ship crews, and most unbelievably, Sir Hudson Lowe, the British governor on St. Helena who watched Napoleon like a hawk, highly unlikely.
Yeah, Lowe wasn't exactly looking to help Napoleon out.
Not at all. And second, could a look-alike really fool everyone, doctors, servants, companions who were living in close proximity with Napoleon on that tiny island for 6 whole years? It strains credibility to the breaking point.
It really does. Fun story. Zero basis in reality. Okay, one more really colorful, probably fake story. The Chocolate Assassin.
Ah, yes. This one's got everything. It shows up in writings like Louis Goldsmith's in 1905. Picture this. Napoleon's at his uncle's palace. Gets an anonymous note. Don't drink your morning chocolate. It's poisoned.
Dun, dun, dun.
Right. So the Chamberlain brings the chocolate. Napoleon's suspicious, demands to see whoever made it. A woman comes forward. Napoleon challenges her. She snatches the cup, drinks the poisoned chocolate herself.
No.
Collapses, and with her dying breath, confesses she was a lover he'd abandoned after she had his child, seeking revenge. Then she dies. Classic spurned lover trope.
That is incredibly dramatic. Was there a twist?
The story adds that the warning note came from the cook who'd seen her add something to the chocolate and got rewarded for saving Napoleon.
Okay, it's pure melodrama. Is there any truth to it?
The sources are very clear on this one. Certainly untrue. No historical basis whatsoever.
But does a story like that leave any kind of legacy?
Possibly 2 things. It might have reinforced the idea that Napoleon really liked chocolate, which seems to be a popular belief, true or not. And it's just such a perfect example of that woman scorned revenge plot that it probably gets retold just for the drama, adding to his legendary, complicated love life.
Even fake stories add layers to the legend.
Yeah.
Okay, speaking of things that did physically survive him, it's kind of surprising how much of Napoleon's actual hair is still around.
It really is. The sources confirm this. We know for a fact that 4 locks were given to the Balcombe family on St. Helena, the English family he became friendly with there.
Right.
And even more significantly, in his will, Napoleon specifically left instructions for gold bracelets containing locks of his hair to be made and given to quite a few family members and close friends.
So he actively wanted pieces of himself preserved as keepsakes.
Seems so. And this has had some weird consequences over the centuries. For one, an authenticated lock from the Balkans was actually used relatively recently for scientific tests
To test what?
to test the theory that he might have been poisoned with arsenic. They could analyze the hair for traces.
Wow, connecting a keepsake directly to a modern scientific investigation. That's cool.
It is. On the less reputable side, because real locks exist, con artists have apparently been faking and selling Napoleon's hair for nearly 200 years.
People still buy it.
Oh yeah, if it comes with a convincing-looking story, even a fake one, a supposed lock can still fetch thousands of dollars. The lure of owning a piece of him is strong.
Incredible. Any other weird hair stories?
Well, the sources mention a particularly odd one from 2014. A Swiss watch company bought some authenticated hair at auction
Yeah.
and announced they were making these super high-end watches costing like $10,000 each with a single strand of Napoleon's hair embedded inside.
10 grand for a watch with a hair in it.
Yep. And the sources note the irony. 2 centuries after Napoleon wanted his hair in simple bracelets for people he cared about, it's back in bracelets luxury watches this time for a new generation of wealthy admirers.
That's quite something.
Huh.
The commodification of history right down to the hair.
Okay, let's circle back quickly to General Stengel. We killed the dream story, but the sources point out a different, more subtle historical puzzle about his death. That's really interesting.
Yeah, this is a great example of how history itself can get muddled. So remember, Napoleon wrote a letter on April 27th, 1796, stating very clearly that Stengel was killed in battle at Mondovi. That was the official account.
Okay, contemporary report from the cop, died in battle.
Right. Simple enough. But then, around 1896, 100 years later, a different story starts showing up in some histories. This new version claims Stengel didn't die in the battle.
No.
It claims he died a week after Mondovi, on April 28, 1796, literally the day after Napoleon wrote his letter from complications after having his arm amputated.
A completely different cause and date of death, appearing a century later. That seems odd. Is there any proof for the amputation story? That's the thing. The sources reviewing this say there's no known contemporary evidence supporting the amputation story. It directly contradicts Napoleon's own letter written at the time.
Yet this second story persists.
It does. Apparently, if you look at books and articles mentioning Stengel's death today, it's roughly a 50-50 split. Half repeat Napoleon's killed in battle account, and half repeat the died of amputation later story.
Even though one seems based on contemporary evidence and the other doesn't, how has that not been sorted out?
It seems, as the sources suggest, that because Stengel is considered a relatively minor figure in the grand scheme of things, no historian has really dug deep to definitively resolve this discrepancy.
So, two conflicting facts just coexist in history books for over a century.
Pretty much. It's a small point, but it's a fascinating illustration of how historical narratives can get confused, how easily competing versions can become established, and how sometimes these contradictions just linger unresolved.
Wow. That really does make you think about how we know what we think we know about the past. It's not always set in stone.
Not at all.
Well, this has been quite a journey. We've gone from rabbit stampedes and maybe romance novels to debunking mummy myths, looking at poisoning rumors, the look-alike conspiracy, and even the surprisingly long afterlife of Napoleon's hair.
And through it all, using these sources, we've tried to sort of peel back those layers, haven't we? Trying to see what holds up, what's likely just a story.
And how even the false stories tell us something important about him, about time, about how people saw him. Hopefully for you listening, this deep dive has helped cut through some of that noise and maybe given a clearer view on some of these famous and infamous Napoleon tales.
Absolutely. I think a key thing that comes through is just how much these narratives, true, false, exaggerated, reveal about the sheer impact he had, the intense reactions he provoked. His image was constantly being shaped and fought over, not just then, but ever since.
Yeah, history isn't just the events, it's also the storytelling around the events. And sometimes the story is told when the truth is murky or maybe just less exciting.
Definitely. And maybe let's leave you with this thought to chew on. Think about that General Stengel case again. It seems minor, right? But you have two completely different accounts of his death. One pops up a century late, seemingly without solid proof, yet it becomes just as accepted as the original contemporary account. Both just sit there in the historical record for over 100 years.
Mm-hmm.
What does that tell us about historical knowledge itself? How easily can a narrative, maybe even a wrong one, take hold and just stay there? It makes you wonder, how do we decide which historical stories to trust? And maybe what's our own responsibility in questioning the easy narrative and digging for those unvarnished truths, even for the smaller details?